all the time mental health outreach. I'm here with Tracy Hamilton, a seasoned clinician, mental health advocate, family member. We're here to talk about mental health. Again, this is It's Getting Better All the Time, mental health outreach. And I'm here with clinician, clinical social worker Tracy Hamilton, a clinician in Washington, D.C., with about 5,000 years of experience. She's an advocate, family member, and she's here to talk about mental health. So, Tracy, you can introduce yourself and kind of start how you want to start, but let's do that first. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay. Good morning. I am Tracy Hamilton. I'm an LICSW in the District of Columbia. I have a very eclectic background in social work. I believe in working with all populations, so I would not be pigeonholed into one population, and I can understand people on different levels in different situations, so I can give them the best services possible. And
Okay,
so I'm
thank
here
you.
today to talk to my old supervisor, who was an excellent, excellent supervisor, regarding my experience with my son being diagnosed with a mental health disorder.
Okay, all right. So let's start there. Tell us about that,
Whew. Okay, so we are talking
and
about.
you can tell us whatever you want to tell us or don't want to tell us.
It's fine.
Leave it up to you.
January 2021, my son had an experience where he was smoking hookah. At least he thought it was hookah. But we believe it may have been something else that someone put in the hookah apparatus that he did not know what it was. And from there, he started to have hallucinations, and it kind of spiraled downward. However, when I think back, there may have been some undiagnosed mental health with Keanu that he was struggling with on his own, but he was managing. He had had no history of any kind of psychotic breaks, no history of being hospitalized, no history of diagnosis or treatment until January. Keanu came to me and he said that he needed to talk to someone and he asked me for help. And based on my experience, just watching Keanu's behaviors, I understood that he may have been hearing voices. But every time I would broach the conversation, he would deny and be like, "No, mom, not hearing any voices, but I do need to talk to someone." And so, he appeared to be responding to internal stimuli, laughing to himself. He became very paranoid. He thought people were after him. He would play his headphones like incredibly loud, which usually people do to kind of drown out the voices. And so he struggled with that because again there was no history, and so for him to kind of figure out what was going on and um, how to address it, he couldn't handle it on his own. So he asked for some help. He also wanted to get out of DC because he felt people were after him. And Keanu had some questionable behaviors and questionable friends. He hung out in paradise a lot. And so I could not say what was and was not true. I just knew that I had to keep my son safe as we tried to navigate what the changes were that he was experiencing with his mental health. So he first stayed with my brother in Baltimore, which ended horribly. They got into a physical altercation. Keanu tried to stab him. Then he threatened to harm himself. And so I had to have him taken to the hospital. A very good friend of mine met him at the hospital because I was coming from DC. And so I got there and convinced them to keep him into because of his threats to harm himself, because of his attempt to harm his uncle. And so it took a lot for them to keep him, but they did keep him for maybe I want to say about a week. And they gave him a diagnosis of I want to say paranoid behavior. But his father had been diagnosed with, I think, bipolar disorder with psychotic features, and I thought that that was a more appropriate diagnosis for Keanu. However, at that point, I was just desperate to have him diagnosed. Um, and to have something, some type of treatment started. So I figured that I would deal with the diagnosis later. I just needed him in care to make sure he was safe. And so when he got out, we stayed with various friends and family members until I got Keanu his own apartment. So I was paying for his rent, his everything, because he was unemployed at the time. And up until that time, Keanu had had 2 or 3 jobs at one time. But at this point he could not work because of the things that was going on with his mental health, trying to get him with services and trying to get him on medication to address his issues. So I was living between Baltimore and in DC. And so I tried to act as quickly as possible because as a mother, finding out that your child has a mental health diagnosis is devastating. However, I felt that I had the tools and understanding of mental health to give him the support that he needed. I did not delay. I involved our friends, our family, his friends and family, tried to get him the support that he needed, and to get him the services he needed as quickly as possible, because I understood that the worst case scenario is Keanu was going to hurt himself or hurt others. And so I was trying to race against the clock. But being on the other side of mental health as a clinician is crazy, because I had an experience that I knew it was difficult to access services, but I did not understand how difficult it was to access services when you had a family member who was in need and they were an adult and they could make their own decisions, and you were kind of a bystander trying to help out, but really had no decision making power in his life because he was 25 at the time. And I'm kind of skipping around, but it was just crazy. And so when he got out of the psych ward after the attempt on his uncle, we tried to get him into mental health services. So it was a waiting time, like 7 days. And then I had missed 2 appointments because I got the appointments mixed up, because again, I'm traveling between DC and Baltimore. I'm staying up there for weeks at a time, working from his home or working from my girlfriend's home and working from my home. And so trying to keep those appointments straight, it was just difficult for me, because I was the only support Keanu had in the immediate area as a parent, because his father had relocated to Florida a few years ago. And so it was just, me, him, and his sisters. And so trying to get through the red tape of, oh, you missed an appointment. Now it's another 7 days, 3 days, 4 days before we can have him seen. And, oh, he ran out of medication, but he can't get medication until, we can see him. And it was just a lot. And I think that in the end, when Keanu, died from suicide, I lost him not only to the stigma of mental health in the African American community, but to the red tape that is evident in the mental health services system when you are trying to get someone help who not don't necessarily want help or is ashamed of the help. And he has a window of, okay, I'm gonna do it, but if it take too long, I'm gonna think too hard about it and I'm not going to do it. And so it was a lot of back and forth and me pleading and begging, trying to get him into these services, and not telling people that I'm a social worker, because the way they responded to me changed. when I had questions about the services provided in, in Maryland, because he was in Baltimore, it was just a lot. And so Keanu had gotten to the point where he realized that he needed the medication, and it did help with the voices. However, he was like, "Ma, I don't want to take medication for the rest of my life. I want to try to deal with this on my own, and I want to, try to use marijuana to address it." And I was like, "Well, Keanu, marijuana is part of the reason why we're here at this point." And he was like, "No, it's because I smoked something that somebody else gave me. But if I smoke, I know where I get it from. I think I can address it." And so he started to refuse to take his medication.
Mhm.
Yeah, he started to refuse to take the medication. So I would go up there and spend the night with him for weeks at a time. He would accuse me of taking things out of his home or moving things where he couldn't find them. He would become agitated and irate. It was just a lot. Watching that, and again, I acted as quickly as possible. I tried to involve his family. However, they did not understand his mental health, and was not helpful. It had been a few times where Keanu had threatened to harm himself, but they did not tell me. And it was stated that, "Oh, we talked to him until we knew he was okay." And I'm like, "And where did you get your degree from? And how do you know that he's okay? You're out of town, you're in another state, and then you don't tell the parent who can get to him the quickest." And so it was just a lot. It's a
Mhm.
misunderstanding of the mental health needs, and how they can affect the mind. It is a stigma in the African American community, because they feel like, if I can't take it to God, then I'm not faithful. And I think there's room for spirituality and mental health services. And then there's the concern that Keanu had about what his friends was going to think about him, and how he did not want to have medication run his life for the rest of his life. So it was a perfect storm. I definitely call it the perfect storm of
Yeah.
2021, because of everything that we went through. And as I shared with friends and colleagues, and got advice, and tried to give my son a fighting chance, because nothing I could have done would have saved him if he was not meant to be here. But my job was to give him a fighting chance at life by giving him the services and everything that he needed in a timely fashion. And one of my colleagues said, "I don't mean any harm." She said, "But who better? Who better to deal with this than you? Because you know what to do. You know what
Mhm.
he needs."
And,
And
and,
I
and
was
you
like, "Yeah."
definitely and you definitely did give him a fighting chance, and you
Woo.
definitely did everything that you could possibly do. One of the things I wanted to go back, just a couple of things you said.
Mhm.
You talked about how hard it was, the challenges with getting him admitted into the hospital the first time.
Yes.
Right? Right. What was that like? I mean, because I talk about it. I always tell people, yeah, you may think we may see something, but surprisingly, sometimes when they get to the hospital, the doctors may choose to see something else. So talk about that
Yeah.
challenge and yeah.
So, okay, so it was about 10 o'clock at night. The police, after they detained Keanu and took him to the hospital. My girlfriend got there first, and so she explained the situation to them. I was on the phone, and of course, I know what to say. I know what they're looking for to make a determination to keep him or not keep him. He has to be a danger to himself, to others, or destruction of property, or something like that. And he met those criteria. And even with him trying to leave the hospital, and them security having to be called, I had to beg them, and say he tried to stab his uncle. He threatened to run into traffic. Like, what more do you need to keep him?
Right, exactly. And I think that's the thing that people have to realize that, okay, part of it, okay, you call the police, it's getting the police to
Hmm.
take the person. So even if the police
Yes.
takes your loved one, okay, that's one piece. Okay, they take your loved one to the hospital. It
Yes.
depending on the time of the day, depending on the hospital, depending on the staff training there. Like you
Yes.
said, you have to make a case. You have to.
Yes. Yes.
I always tell people,
Yeah.
if you have to exaggerate, you got to exaggerate. Whatever the thing
Yeah.
is, people will
Absolutely.
say, "Oh, don't do that." But sometimes you have to do that. In your case, that wasn't the case, but it's
Yeah.
something I tell
Yeah.
people because you
And
are not like,
the
look,
the
and look at
sad thing,
that.
and this is why
Yeah.
I sent my girlfriend ahead of me, because I was
Mhm,
fearful that if I did not get there in a timely manner, they were going to release him. And so I
mhm,
sent her ahead of me because she lives in Baltimore and she's known Keanu since he was a baby. And so and it was like, what more information? I said, do we need to wait until he kills somebody or
mhm,
almost kills himself? Like, what are we looking for here? And it was a lot of convincing and begging and pleading. But I didn't care because that was my son. But no one should have to go through that.
right.
Once I lay out in order what he's done, what he said, what my concerns are, and his behavior at that time, because his behavior was very erratic. Keanu wasn't making sense. He was trying to leave the hospital. Like, that should have been enough to say, okay, you know what, at least it's worth an observation.
And again, it's important for our audience to understand or to think about there's the bias in healthcare. Because a lot of
Absolutely.
times when you see men, right, especially young men, if they're aggressive, if there's any hit of drugs, people automatically will think it's the
Hmm.
drugs. Or if they see some aggressiveness, they'll get turned off by the aggressiveness because they think, oh, that's
Absolutely.
just the way they are, or that's just who they are.
Absolutely.
And it's important that I'm glad you were there to advocate. But I wanted to point this out. So a lot of times, when our people go into the hospital, many times we go into the hospital, by the time we get there, it's a severe case, right?
Yeah.
So
And
when
they
you
look
get
at it
there,
differently.
right, exactly.
Hmm.
They look at it differently, and you can add more to that, but they look at it differently and they tend to minimize, oh, this is just what they are, this is what they do,
Yeah.
he'll be
Hmm.
okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
Keanu wasn't making any sense. The conversation, it was like tangible. He was, just talking all off topic, and then he would come back to the topic and then talk about conspiracies. And I'm like, you can see that the conversation is not making sense. The behavior is erratic. He was brought in by the police. He attempted to stab the uncle. He threatened to run in traffic. Like, what more? What more
Hmm.
do you need at this point?
Hmm.
um and even with his family, his father's family, we talked to him until he was okay. No, you call me, because at that time we could have had him hospitalized again,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
if need be, because he was talking about harming himself. He had a plan. And so, because they did not take it as seriously as I did, or as seriously as I thought they should have, because even with me trying to do a family meeting, right? And I'm big on family meetings. I want everybody involved. I want to hear everybody's, concern or whatever, so we can make a plan and we are all working from the same plan. They never we never had the family meeting. We never had the family meeting.
Hmm.
We never got on the same page. And so it was difficulties from all sides, from, you know, his family, our culture, and he doesn't have Medicaid. He has private insurance. The insurance company, the
Hmm. Hmm.
the mental health system. It
Hmm.
was a perfect storm, and that's why I keep saying
Right,
it was
exactly.
definitely a perfect storm, because there was opposition on all sides, and it was me and Keanu in the middle.
Right. And then when you talk about again, some things should be, you would think in this country would be easy, it would be automatic. You
Absolutely.
shouldn't have to fight for mental health care, but unfortunately, sometimes that happens. So, and you also said something, I wrote a couple things down, I'll come back to that,
I know. I felt
about
like I was rambling. I'm sorry.
no, 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 no. This is great. Trying to get services, right? I think
Yeah.
you highlighted a big problem with a lot of family members. It's like you're a mother, you right? You work, you
Mhm.
have a job, you have other kids, and this
Mhm.
situation and it's overwhelming for family members, and you're the only one that's there to advocate. Again,
Yep.
it shouldn't have happened. It should have been a thing where okay, you're in the psych when you're in the hospital. Before you leave the hospital, there should be an appointment. having somebody to come and be
Right.
there with you to help
Right.
connect. It should always be the family members. So of course for
Right.
you it was difficult, like you said, you had to miss appointments
Right.
because, and this is what happens with family members.
Yeah,
It's
it
so
was just
overwhelming.
overwhelming.
It's a lot of
Right.
stuff that kind
So,
of
and
goes
he
on.
he had an appointment. He had an appointment
Mhm,
when he left the hospital, but it was for between 3 to 7 days after he was
mhm,
discharged. You should
mhm,
have an appointment immediately once you are discharged
mhm,
from a mental health facility, because you were at a point where you had to be inpatient. And so
right.
your turnaround time for your follow-up appointment should be much shorter than if I'm
Mhm,
walking in on off the street and making an appointment. And then
mhm,
missed appointments should not take that long. And I should be able to get somebody to come out and assess him.
mhm,
Meet people where they are. Luckily I drive, but
mhm,
he lived in the city, and the place was located, on the outskirts. And so it took us about 30 minutes to get there. But I should be able to get services where I live, and I
mhm,
should not have to travel these long distances to get the services that I need. And
mhm,
then the resource and referral process, there were some closer places. There was this program, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was for people young adults. Keanu met the age criteria, who had first time psychosis or psychotic
mhm,
episodes.
mhm,
That was like right in the city that I could have taken him to, instead of taking so much time trying to get him to this place that the hospital recommended. And so when I turned and I pivoted to try to get to this agency that was closer. Keanu was tired at that time. He was tired of trying to
mhm,
get these appointments, the wait time, the clinical setting. The setting was not welcoming at all. It was a clinic
mhm,
setting. And so
mhm.
by the time I got him to the other place where everybody was in the room at one time around the table and could do, everything that needed to be done, Keanu had made up his mind that he no longer wanted to do that. And but the wait.
And again, I want you to stay with that same point, but I want people who are listening to kind of realize, again, when we talk about persistent illnesses, mental illnesses,
Mhm.
mental health concerns, this is another challenge that family members face. So that's
Yeah.
why it's so important, like what you were saying, you should have had that appointment before you left the hospital. It should have been done
Absolutely.
within 24, 48 hours. As a
Mhm.
clinic, if you're a clinic and provider and you're listening to me in the clinic, if you have someone that's been connected to you from a hospital and you know this person was in an inpatient psychiatric ward, that should be your
Yes.
number one priority. So when you
Yes.
look
Yes.
in
Because
your roster and you see
there's a
that
different
that
level
person didn't
from a
show up,
walk-in.
right?
Yes.
That's right. If
Absolutely.
they didn't show up for their appointment, then you should automatically reach out and say, "Oh, wait a
Yes.
minute. We got this
Yes.
guy that just came from the hospital. He missed his appointment. We need to reach out." Right. So
Mhm.
again, I think that is so important. But I just wanted to highlight that there. And I wanted to
Yeah.
pick back up again. But
Yeah.
that's when we're dealing with family members, especially when they're adults, it's hard because again, the illness starts talking to them. When they're in the hospital, they're stable someone.
They're
They get out
stable,
of the
they're on
hospital,
their
they are not
medication. Absolutely.
right. But once that
Absolutely.
wears away, then they kind of go
And
back without the treatment. Go
and
ahead.
the thing about Keanu is very intelligent, very
Mhm,
respectful. And he speaks he was very articulate. And
mhm,
so and they was like, "Oh, he loves you." And he was like, "I'm not talking to y'all anymore until I talk to my mother. This is not making sense." And so they looked at Keanu differently, right? And I'm
mhm,
like, "Don't let him trick you."
mhm,
Keanu has lost his little mind. We are struggling. And my son, wonderful child, but
mhm.
this was not the man that I raised. He was struggling. And it's just, I can't even explain just the awe, and sitting on the other side of the table with mental health was an eye opener for me at that time, because we have a lot of holes in our system. that is very detrimental to the health and the needs of the people who are not making good decisions. And when Keanu passed away, I was in the process of filling out paperwork to get the courts involved to force him to get the services that he needed. But I was too late.
Mhm, mhm. And I think the thing is, I can tell you, even with that, there would have been a lot of red tape, right?
I
So
know.
the thing is,
And that's why
if
I didn't wait. I'm like, okay, okay, this is getting out of hand. And that's why I started the
Mhm,
process sooner than later.
mhm, mhm.
But it wasn't soon enough, and I did not complete it soon enough. So I knew
Well, here's the
everything is
thing:
a process
you
and take
did
time.
right, but here's the thing: you did everything right. Okay, you did
I
everything right.
tried.
You jumped on everything as much as you could. Because a lot of people don't know how to pivot quickly. You pivoted quicker, right?
Hmm.
But it was one of these things where it was, as you said, it was that perfect storm.
It
It
was a
was that
perfect storm, and we were
everything coming
working.
together, and it was.
Hmm.
Mhm,
And we were working
mhm.
between
So
DC and
that,
Baltimore.
mhm.
And so I
Yeah, so
know
it was the perfect.
DC
Mhm,
resources much better than I know Maryland resources. But I knew Keanu was paranoid and he wanted to be away from DC. So I had to honor that as best I could and try to figure out how to navigate the Maryland resources with as much help as I possibly could muster at that
also
time.
good. But here's the thing: let's separate it from you being a clinician and you being a parent, right? You would think
Hmm.
as a parent that the providers or the people in that area where they are in Maryland, you shouldn't have to know. A parent shouldn't have to know all of the
Absolutely not.
resources, right, in order to be able to tell the helping profession at this particular clinic, at this hospital, what to do, right? When you
Absolutely
talk
not.
about homes in the system,
Hmm.
go ahead,
Yeah. So
okay?
what happened
Homes in
was
the system is mhm,
Yeah, no, I was saying what happened was I came across this other program as I was Googling resources in Baltimore. And it wasn't a list that was
mhm,
given to me or, any of those things. And so it was just a hunt. I always call it a hunt for Red October. It was a mad hunt
mhm,
as quickly as possible. But because I had support, I had friend support, I had family support because I have half brothers and sisters in Baltimore who
mhm,
looked in on Keanu, spent time with Keanu, checked in on him when I could not be there. Had they not been there, I don't know what I would have done. I
mhm,
don't know what I would have done for the friends and the extended family that I had, my church family. They all pitched in as much as they could to try to help me navigate everything and to support Keanu. Because again, I was paying his bills and my bills and taking off work.
mhm,
So you can imagine what my finances looked like at that time and what they still look like. Because I'm still
mhm,
trying to recover from all of the
mhm,
money I spent. Just trying to get, him what he needed, where he could be comfortable, where he could focus on his, mental health and trying to get himself together. But unfortunately, we lost that battle, June
mhm.
30th of 2021.
Right, right. And we'll come back, definitely come back to that. But I think the thing is, so just to, put everything in perspective a little bit, you're talking about as a family member, you had to fight the system, you had to
Yes,
fight the insurance, you had to fight getting
yes,
services, fight to get him admitted into the hospital, and then you also
yes,
had to fight his the symptoms of his untreated illness. Because that's what it is. But I don't
absolutely.
want to do this. I don't want to take these medications. And
Yes,
then take care of yourself,
yes,
take care of your other kids, then work,
yes,
right?
yeah,
So it's hard, right? It's a lot to
absolutely.
it. And then, like you said, the battle was lost not because you didn't give it an effort. It was the battle was lost because there were so many things that other things that could have been done differently, right?
Absolutely.
I always talk about we talk about what the police should have done, what police should do. But in this situation, in many situations, the police do what they can do. And also, it's not the police job. This should have been
Mhm, mhm.
our legislators. It should have been the insurance. It should have been the mental
Absolutely,
health clinicians at the
absolutely.
office.
And
So
then
it's not
and
just
the
one
funny
thing.
thing is at this point, the police did exactly what I needed them to do, was to take him to the
Mhm.
hospital so I could meet him at the hospital.
Mhm.
So they did exactly what I needed them
Mhm.
to do once we got the right people there on the scene.
Mhm. Mhm. And that's why it's so important for us with education, because you mentioned about he was saying things, was telling other family members he was thinking about killing himself, but they didn't say anything. And that's
No,
why it's so important
that
when we
that
do
hurt me.
these type
Oh,
of broadcasts, so people
yeah.
understand. Don't especially when a person has had one attempt or said it, call
What
someone.
what the thing is that you've known Keanu his whole life. He's never said anything like that. So that should have been a red flag to you right there.
Hmm.
That should have been a red flag that this is not something he says on a regular basis. And no matter how many times someone say it, it should always be taken seriously because you don't know what's on their mind. But Keanu had never threatened to harm himself. And so that should have been a red flag. You were in Florida, right? And he's here and I'm here. I'm in DC. I'm 30 minutes away. How do you assess him? This is not your field of focus. How do you assess him to say he's okay and no one calls the mother? That's right
Hmm.
down the street, you know, and that can get to him in a matter of seconds or minutes or an hour. How do you not call to say I'm concerned? He's
Hmm.
talking about killing himself. He's gotten into an altercation with one of his neighbors. He's doing things that's bizarre. Can you go check on him, or can we have somebody go and check on him? Because I had people in the city who could get to him much quicker than I could, but because I did not know, that was a missed opportunity to get Keanu the help that he needed.
Right. And I think the word there, I always share with people, and you do as well, is the word change, right? So
Mhm.
when you know someone and you start seeing changes in behavior,
Yes.
that's an indicator that something is not right. Something I
Absolutely.
need to get him some help. So you go from a person who's never talked about suicide now is talking about suicide, someone
Yeah.
who doesn't get into fights now is getting into fights, and you start noticing
Mhm.
change in sleep, change in appetite. That's enough to let you know that hey, something is going on. Something
Absolutely.
is wrong here, and that's just a hint that we want people to know. When you look at mental illnesses, pay attention to the changes, right? Pay
Mhm.
attention to yeah, pay attention to the change. I
No
had a
matter how
cousin of
subtle.
mine.
Mhm.
Right, exactly. No matter how subtle, and don't minimize it. Ask
Yeah.
kind of what's going on, and get the person some help if you don't know what to do.
Right.
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 So I had a cousin that was similar. He's an older gentleman, so he's my like was in his 70s or 70s,
Mhm.
80s, who died by suicide, and it was a shock. But I recently
Yeah.
found out that prior to him dying by suicide with a gun, he shot himself. He had actually ran his car up into a tree, but no one took that as a serious attempt.
Yeah.
Right? People,
Yeah.
they missed it. Okay, no one
Yeah.
said, okay, he's been depressed. A lot of his wife had died. His best cousin had died. A lot of changes. No one put two and two
Mhm.
together until it was too late. So it's
Yeah.
important to pay attention to those changes.
Absolutely. And
What
hindsight
would
is
you
always
say as
2020.
a two things? Exactly, exactly. We can always kind of go back. I'm going to ask you this question twice now. As a
Mhm.
family member, what lessons or suggestions would you give to others? Let's do that as a family member. Family
As a
member to family member. What suggestions or lessons?
Okay. So family member to family member. What I have been right recently, what I've been talking about is getting oh my goodness, it's slipping my mind. A
Nonprofit.
power of attorney signed. A power of attorney signed for my children, for me, and for me, for my remaining children. So if something happens again, I will have the ability to make some decisions without their permission if need be. Um, Also making sure that you talk to your family. Me and my children have a very close relationship. And so Keanu came to me and was like, "Ma, I think I need to talk to somebody." But at some point he was like, "Why can't you just be my therapist?" I said, "Because I'm your mother. I can't be your therapist and your mother." but having an open relationship and talking to people and just listening to understand and not necessarily to respond. We always have family meetings um, amongst ourselves. When I tried to incorporate a bigger family meeting, that did not go well. But having family meetings, having a network of supports that you can turn to, um, and not taking things for granted. You do not know people. You know what they allow you to know of them. And so is you should never make assumptions. Oh, he's just joking, he's just playing. Take it seriously and act immediately. Act immediately. Reach
Mhm.
out for help, advice. Don't sit on it. Don't wait.
Okay. Now, as a clinician, same question. What lessons or suggestions would you give to others based on these other clinicians?
But as a clinician, I would look at our
Clinician to
intake.
clinician.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
would look at the intake process when you have people who are in crisis, and people who are being discharged from a mental health, an inpatient setting. Are you seeing them as soon as possible? Can you see them as soon as they're discharged? Can you go to the home and see them in their setting if they cannot get to you or they're not willing to come to you? um it Can you do emergency medication for a couple of days until they can get to their next appointment if an appointment has been missed? Are you asking the client to include family and supports that can help them through the transition from inpatient to outpatient? Things like that. Incorporate the family and friends and whoever may be of a support and a benefit to the client. But how we do social work, how we do therapy, it has to change. It has to meet the needs of the person who is seeking the help. And also look at your setting. Keanu responded much better to the second setting of the agency that I found, and I wish I had the name in front of me. Versus the very clinical setting that we went to, that he was referred to. So look at how your setting is, and things like that. Are you having your client tell their story to 3 or 4 different people when the one agency had everybody at the table? And so as they asked questions, they all took the information down, so they did not have to keep asking Keanu to share his story and share his information. And they went on about Keanu's acceptance of, are you okay with these people being here? Is it too many people? Are you overwhelmed? We just want to make sure we get the information so you don't have to keep telling it over and over again, which was a much better way of doing the intake than you meet with the clinician today. You got to come back and meet with the psychiatrist. You can't do this until you meet with this person. And so you tend to tell the same story 2 and 3 times to different people, to different members of your clinical team.
And then lastly, how would you, what would you recommend to family members who have, had a family member to die by suicide? How do you, you never get over it, but how do you make it through day by day?
So
What are some suggestions?
I had to turn stand on my faith. I had to turn to my faith. Um and when they say surrender to the Lord and hand it over to God, is what I had to do. I also had to understand that um I will always be in some level of mourning for the rest of my life. I will always be at some level of mourning for the rest of my life, and I'm okay with that because as time goes on, it gets better. The
Mhm.
triggers are less. The episodes don't last as long. Also, I had to reach into my toolkit and and really focus on the spiritual, the mental, and the physical, because I wanted to be whole. I wanted to honor the person that I lost, because I did not only lose Keanu. 30 days prior, I lost my fiance. And so it was two people back to back. And I knew if I did not figure out how to deal with this, I was not going to make it. And so I had to make a decision that, how do you respond? That's the only control I have, is how I respond to the situation. So I refuse to allow grief to tell me how to respond. And so I learned to sit with my feelings and allow myself to have those moments of whatever those emotions may be it sadness or, whatever the dominating emotion is. I allow myself to have those moments, and I set a timeline. If it goes past a couple of days, then I'm seeking advice. I'll call you. I'll call my other social work friends. And if that does not work, I have I'll call a therapist and start my therapy sessions. But I have a toolkit that I work from of coping skills. I walk, I pray, I meditate, I run, I work out, I jump double dutch, I go roller skating, I talk to friends, and I do things to tolerance. If it becomes overwhelming, it's okay for me to say it's overwhelming and I need to step back. I choose me first, because what I don't want to do is have their deaths to be in vain. They would not want me to be less than who I am. And so I try to honor them every day by taking care of me. And so that's how I check my temperature every morning. Check my temperature. What can you handle today? You know, where are you today? Are we going to work today? Is it do we need to take a day? And I have a morning ritual. I get up, I pray, I walk, and I meditate to try to start my day off on the right foot. To make sure that I am in a place to deal with all of the things that I have to deal with as a social worker, and still take care of me. So trying to find that balance every day in my life. And if I can't find it, I create it. And if I can't create it, then I have to reevaluate my situation to determine if I need to make some other decisions.
Thank you. And is there, as we close out, is there anything you want to leave us with? Any last words?
The only thing I would leave you with is that losing two people so close together, it really made me understand that life is not guaranteed to any of us. And so you need to reevaluate your life, and relationships that you should let go of, relationships that you need to foster and encourage, or relationships that you should repair. And we all have to work on our relationship with death and dying, because we are not meant to be here forever, and no one knows when. You're going to be called home. And so you want to live your life in a way where you love the people that you love and they know that you love them, and you spend the quality time. And if you need to say you're sorry, then say you're sorry, because once that time is gone, there is no getting it back. And I think what has helped me is that me and Keanu had a good relationship. Me and my daughters had a good relationship. Me and my fiance had a good relationship. And for me, the pandemic was actually a blessing in disguise, because we spent so much time together during that time, playing games, watching movies, just doing things and being each other's company, that I was able to spend a lot of time with them before they passed, which also helped with kind of, having some closure and things like that.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. On behalf of myself and everyone else who will be listening and watching this, thank you for opening up. Thank you for giving us so many things to think about. And we just thank you for, I do, because I know your son, you didn't shortchange him on anything.
I appreciate
I
that.
know,
I
and I know
appreciate
he
that.
knows that. Yeah,
Yeah,
you didn't,
yeah.
you didn't. You did everything that you can. In the end, it was just one of those things where, at that very second, at that very moment, the other voice just overrode it. But
Yeah,
the
yeah.
other
And
feeling
it
just overrode it, which is my treatment. Mhm.
absolutely. And it just wasn't meant to be. It
Yeah,
was time for him to go home with the Lord. And I understand. Again, I rely on my faith. And I knew if it was meant for Keanu to still be here, he would still be here. And so I knew that it was just his time to go home and be with the Lord. And I had to make peace with that. And I am working on continuing to make peace with that, every day.
yeah.
And some
Like you
days
said,
are
it's
better
a
than others.
process. Yeah,
It's definitely,
yeah, yeah.
and
Yeah, I
there's
mean,
no
I think,
time limit.
yeah,
There's no time limit
exactly.
on your process. Your
Hmm.
grief is tailor made for you. And it's no time
Hmm.
limit. There's no rush. You take your time and do what you need to do. Yeah.
Right. And I tell people sometimes you might go from acceptance one day to anger the next day to
Absolutely.
not getting out of bed the next day, um,
Absolutely. And it's all
kicking
okay.
the dog the next day. Right, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and it's all okay. And
Mhm.
luckily
Thank
for
you.
me,
We're getting ready to, unless you have something else.
yeah, no, I was just saying, luckily
Mm-hmm.
for me, I have not experienced anger. I've experienced a host of other emotions, but anger
Mm-hmm.
was not one of them. So I'm just grateful for that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's day by day, one thing at a time, day by day. So.
All
And
right.
thank you for
Thank you. We are
having me.
signing off
And
now.
I'm so excited that I made
And
it through
thank
without
you.
crying.
But that's okay. And if you did, that was okay. That was
I
okay
know.
because
I know.
even as you're talking, I remember he's just a nice kid. Just a nice regular kid. It's like some kids. I don't want to say they just goofy, but at that age, but they just regular kids. They just at that
Yeah.
age they do things that 20-year-old, 20-something-year-old kids do, and it's
Yeah.
just wasn't a bad kid. Just
No,
yeah,
not at
he was
all.
just who he
Not at
was,
all.
and like I
Yeah.
said, I know you did everything that you could do, and he,
Yeah.
yeah, he was just like a sweet kid. So
He was
we
an awesome
definitely
kid. Keanu was
miss
an
him. But
awesome kid. Hmm.
you and I will talk. Yeah, he was.
Okay.
He did. He did. Because wasn't he was also doing the video and the drawing, was it? Right? Right?
Yeah,
And
Keanu
poetry.
Keanu was he was working at the zoo, and so he did face painting for kids. Keanu
Yeah.
he had his friend who had been shot in the head, and
Hmm.
he did CPR until the ambulance came.
Hmm.
And the young man is still alive. Keanu saved his life. He was a awesome kid. But as time went on and
Hmm.
those voices started, he started having nightmares about that incident and being covered in blood and everything. But Keanu, he jumped in and his friends talked about how he did CPR and nobody else knew how to do CPR, and how they watched him save their friend's life, and they were amazed by that. And he was a good kid. He was a good
Yeah.
kid.
And that's the
Yeah.
memory we'll close out.